The crimson rain of Verdania fell in gentle patterns across the crystalline leaves, creating a symphony that usually brought Naya peace. Tonight, however, something felt wrong. She pressed her palm against the bioluminescent wall of her clinic, feeling the pulse of life that flowed through the living structure. Her empathic abilities, enhanced by years of training in the healing arts, picked up distress signals from somewhere beyond the forest canopy. Naya had chosen this remote location precisely because it was far from the complexities of civilized space. Here, among the singing trees and phosphorescent streams of Verdania, she could practice her craft without the overwhelming emotional noise of crowded settlements. The occasional injured explorer or crashed pilot found their way to her sanctuary, and she healed them with a combination of advanced medical knowledge and her rare empathic gift. But this feeling was different, stronger, more urgent. She gathered her medical kit, its bioorganic components responding to her touch with a warm glow, and stepped into the gentle rain. The forest welcomed her with soft chimes from the crystal formations that grew alongside the trees. Following her empathic senses, she moved deeper into the wilderness than she'd ventured in months. The distress grew stronger with each step, accompanied by something else's strange emotional signature she couldn't quite identify. Pain, yes, but underneath it lay something that made her skin crawl. She almost turned back twice, but her healer's oath compelled her forward. She found him in a clearing where the ancient Verdanian stones formed a natural circle. He lay crumpled against one of the monoliths, his body twisted at angles that suggested multiple fractures. Dark blood pooled beneath him, mixing with the luminescent rainwater to create an eerie glow. Naya rushed forward, her empathic senses immediately assessing his condition. The pain radiating from him was overwhelming: broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe trauma to his left leg. But beneath the agony, she detected something that made her pause. A coldness, an emptiness that seemed at odds with someone fighting for their life. She shook off the feeling and knelt beside him. He was humanoid, though clearly not fully human. His skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and his hair was the color of starlight. High cheekbones and angular features gave him an aristocratic appearance that seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, placing her hands gently on his chest. Her empathic healing abilities flowed outward, beginning the delicate work of stabilizing his vital functions. His eyes fluttered open, brilliant violet irises that seemed to glow in the dim light. For a moment, they focused on her with startling intensity before glazing over with pain. "Help," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please." Naya felt his desperation through her empathic connection, and it overwhelmed her natural caution. She began working immediately, using her abilities to ease his pain while her medical knowledge guided her physical treatment. The biocomponents in her kit responded to her will, forming temporary supports for his broken bones and synthetic skin to seal his wounds. As she worked, she found herself studying his face. Even injured and unconscious, there was something compelling about him, something that drew her in despite the warning signals her intuition kept sending. The journey back to her clinic was treacherous. She had to fashion a hover stretcher from her emergency supplies and navigate the forest paths in darkness. Several times, she felt his consciousness slip away entirely, and she had to stop to stabilize him with her empathic healing. Her clinic's bioluminescent walls brightened as they approached, responding to her stress levels and the presence of a critical patient. The living structure's medical bay automatically configured itself as she guided the stretcher. Inside, forming an intensive care pod around the stranger. "Computer, run full diagnostic scan," she commanded, though she knew her empathic abilities would tell her more than any machine. As the scans ran, Naya maintained physical contact with her patient, using her gift to monitor his vital functions and ease his pain. The results that appeared on the bio-displays confirmed what she already knew: multiple fractures, severe internal injuries, and signs of what looked like torture. But something bothered her about the pattern of injuries. They were severe, yes, but distributed in a way that suggested they'd been carefully inflicted. Each wound was serious enough to cause agony, but positioned to avoid truly vital organs. It was as if someone had wanted him to suffer without actually dying. She pushed the disturbing thought aside and focused on her work. Over the next several hours, she used every technique at her disposal to stabilize him. Her empathic healing was particularly effective. With trauma cases, she could feel exactly where the damage was worst and guide the body's natural healing processes to repair itself. As dawn broke over Verdania, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Naya finally allowed herself to rest. The stranger was stable, though still unconscious. She'd done everything she could for now. She activated the clinic's security protocols and settled into the chair beside his biopod. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Something about this patient disturbed her in ways she couldn't articulate. Her empathic gift usually allowed her to read people like open books, but with him, there were layers she couldn't penetrate, hidden depths that felt deliberately concealed. When he finally awakened, it was with a gasp that seemed more surprised than pained. His violet eyes immediately found hers, and she felt a jolt of something: recognition, fear, attraction. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice stronger than she'd expected. "My clinic," Naya replied, studying his expression carefully. "On Verdania. I found you injured in the stone circle. Do you remember what happened?" His face went blank for a moment, then filled with what appeared to be confusion and distress. There was an attack. Pirates, I think. My ship." He raised a shaking hand to his forehead. "I can't remember everything clearly." Naya's empathic senses picked up genuine confusion and fear from him, which should have been reassuring. But underneath those surface emotions, she detected something else: a careful control that seemed inconsistent with someone who'd suffered severe trauma. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Cale," he replied without hesitation. "Cale Thornton. Was a diplomatic courier, traveling between the Outer Rim colonies." His eyes filled with apparent grief. "The others on my ship, are they?" "I only found you," Naya said softly. "I'm sorry." The pain that crossed his features seemed genuine, and Naya felt herself softening toward him. Whatever her instincts were telling her, he was clearly suffering, and she was a healer. It was her duty to help. "Thank you," Cale whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. "You saved my life." The moment their skin made contact, Naya felt a shock of connection that went beyond her usual empathic abilities. Images flashed through her mind: brief glimpses of violence, of faces twisted in fear, of her own clinic seen from outside. But they were gone so quickly she wasn't sure if they were real or just products of her exhausted imagination. Kel's eyes watched her intently, as if gauging her reaction. "Are you all right? You look pale." "Just tired," Naya managed, pulling her hand away. "I should let you rest. Recovery from injuries like yours takes time." But as she moved to leave, Kel's voice stopped her. "Please don't go. I'm afraid to be alone." The nightmares, the vulnerability in his voice touched something deep in Naya's heart. Despite her instincts, despite the strange inconsistencies she'd noticed, she found herself returning to the chair beside his bed. "All right," she said softly. "I'll stay until you fall asleep." Cale smiled, then an expression of such apparent gratitude and warmth that it took her breath away. But as he closed his eyes and his breathing deepened, Naya couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Outside, the crystal rain continued to fall, and deep in the forest, something howled, a sound that spoke of hunting, of patience, and of prey that didn't yet know it was being stalked. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that should have been peaceful. Kel's recovery progressed with remarkable speed to remarkable. Naya began to think as she watched him move around her clinic with increasing ease. His broken ribs had healed in half the expected time, and the severe trauma to his leg showed only faint scarring. When she mentioned this to him, he attributed it to his mixed heritage and superior genetics. "My people heal quickly," he explained, with that charming smile that never quite reached his violet eyes. "It's one of the advantages of our evolution on a harsh world." Naya accepted the explanation, though something about it felt rehearsed. More troubling was how completely he'd integrated himself into her daily routine. What had begun as necessary medical care had evolved into something she couldn't quite name. He helped with her research, organized her medical supplies, and prepared meals from the forest's edible plants with surprising expertise. "You know a lot about Verdanian flora for a diplomatic courier," she observed one evening as he served a perfectly seasoned stew made from crystalline fungi. Kale paused, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on the serving spoon. I've traveled extensively. You pick things up. He looked at her with those mesmerizing eyes. Besides, I had an excellent teacher these past weeks. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Naya found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way he listened with such focused attention when she spoke about her work. He seemed genuinely fascinated by her empathic healing abilities, asking detailed questions about how they worked, what their limitations were, and whether she could use them defensively. Defensively, she'd asked, puzzled by the question. Well, if you can heal, I wondered if you could do the opposite, cause pain instead of relieving it. The question disturbed her. Though his tone remained casually curious, the gift doesn't work that way. She lied smoothly. In truth, she'd discovered years ago that her abilities could indeed be reversed. But it was knowledge she'd never shared with anyone. The potential for abuse was too great. That night, she activated her long-range communicator for the first time since finding Kale. The connection to her former mentor, Jorik, took several minutes to establish across the vast distances of space. The elderly healer's weathered face appeared on the screen, his expression immediately concerned. Naya, I was beginning to worry. It's been months since your last transmission. I'm sorry. Master Jorik, I've had a patient who required intensive care. She found herself reluctant to provide details. Though she couldn't say why, Jorik's pale blue eyes studied her face through the connection. Even across the light years, his own empathic abilities allowed him to sense her emotional state. You look troubled, child. Tell me about this patient. Naya described Kel's injuries, his recovery, and her growing unease. She was careful not to mention how attractive she found him, or how his presence had begun to fill the loneliness she'd carried for years. In her isolated sanctuary, Jorik listened without interruption, but his expression grew increasingly grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Naya, he said finally, I want you to run a deep genetic scan on this man and check the interstellar criminal databases. Master, surely you don't think, I think, Jorik interrupted, that your description matches reports I've been receiving through healer networks. A man fitting his description has been linked to several disappearances in the Outer Rim. Young healers, mostly, women working alone in remote locations. A chill ran down Naya's spine. That's impossible. Kale was nearly dead when I found him. He couldn't have. Could he have faked his injuries? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. Naya's mind raced back over the past weeks, remembering inconsistencies she'd dismissed. The way his pain levels never quite matched his injuries. How quickly he'd adapted to her clinic's layout. His detailed questions about her abilities and isolation. Run the scans, Naya, Jorik urged, and be careful. If I'm right, you may be in great danger. The transmission ended, leaving Naya alone with her doubts and a growing sense of dread. She found herself studying Kale differently over the next few days, watching for signs she'd missed. He seemed to sense her increased scrutiny and responded by becoming even more attentive, more charming. He brought her flowers from the forest varieties she'd never seen before. Despite years of studying Verdanian botany, when she asked where he'd found them, he smiled mysteriously. I have my secrets, he said, tucking one of the luminescent blooms behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her skin, and she felt that strange jolt of connection again. This time, the images were clearer flashes of her clinic from outside, detailed maps of the surrounding area, and something that looked like surveillance equipment. She jerked away, her heart pounding. Kale, what's wrong? His concern seemed genuine, but there was something else in his eyes, a calculating quality that made her skin crawl. Nothing. I need some air. She fled to the forest, her mind reeling. The empathic connection she'd felt might not have been her reading him. It could have been him projecting thoughts into her mind. Some rare individuals possessed that ability, though it was usually considered a myth. When she returned to the clinic, she found Kale in her research lab, standing over her computer terminal. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. I was looking for you, he said. I thought you might want to join me for dinner. But Naya noticed that her computer was still active, displaying files she was certain she'd secured. Her patient records, her research on empathic healing, Her communication logs all had been accessed. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Kel's smile was sharp as a blade. "Just learning more about my savior. You're quite accomplished, Naya. Your reputation in certain circles is impressive." The way he said it made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She realized with growing horror that she'd been catalogued, studied, and assessed like a specimen. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest and the soft breathing from the guest room where Kale slept. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to activate her emergency beacon and call for help. But doubt held her back. What if she was wrong? What if Jorek's warnings had simply made her paranoid? Her empathic abilities, usually so reliable, seemed muted when she tried to read Kale. It was as if he'd learned to shield himself from her, or worse, as if he was actively blocking her gift. The next morning, she woke to find breakfast prepared and Kale humming softly as he worked in her kitchen. He looked up as she entered, his violet eyes bright with affection that felt suddenly performative. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, crossing to kiss her forehead. "I thought we might take a walk today. There's something I want to show you." The casual endearment sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. When had their relationship shifted from doctor-patient to whatever this was becoming? She tried to remember specific moments, conversations, but they seemed to blur together in a haze of confusion. "I have work to do today," she said carefully. "Research that can't wait." Something flickered across Kel's features, annoyance, perhaps, or frustration, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Your work is important. Perhaps this evening, then?" As the day progressed, Naya found herself jumping at shadows. Every time she turned around, Kale seemed to be watching her with those intense violet eyes. When she retreated to her lab to run the genetic scans Jorek had suggested, she discovered that several key components of her analysis equipment had malfunctioned. The probability of multiple simultaneous failures was astronomical. "Having trouble?" Kel's voice from the doorway made her spin around, her heart hammering. "Just some technical difficulties," she managed. He moved closer, and she caught a sense she hadn't noticed before, something wild and predatory that had nothing to do with his carefully maintained appearance. "Technology can be so unreliable," he murmured, his hand settling on her shoulder. The touch that had once comforted her now felt like a trap. "Perhaps you should take a break. You've been working so hard lately." His fingers tightened slightly, and Naya realized with crystalline clarity that she was no longer in control of the situation. Perhaps she never had been. The wounded stranger she'd saved was revealed as something else entirely, a predator who had identified her as prey and was now moving in for the kill. But as Kel's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheek with false tenderness, Naya made a crucial decision. She would play along, at least until she could figure out how to escape the web he'd woven around her. "You're right," she said, forcing herself to lean into his touch. "I have been pushing myself too hard." His smile was triumphant, and in that moment, Naya saw past all his careful masks to the cold intelligence beneath. She was looking at a creature that had perfected the art of manipulation, who fed on trust and thrived on the suffering of those foolish enough to care. And she had invited him into her sanctuary, given him everything he needed to destroy her. The realization should have filled her with despair. Instead, as Kale pulled her closer and whispered promises of an evening together, Naya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Rage. Clean, pure, and absolutely focused. If Kale thought he had found easy prey in the isolated healer of Verdania, he was. The trading post at Meridian Falls materialized through Verdania's morning mist like a mirage. Naya hadn't visited the settlement in over a year, preferring the solitude of her forest clinic. But Kale had been insistent about the trip. "You've been isolated too long," he'd argued with that persuasive smile. "A change of scenery will do you good. Besides, I need to check if any messages came through the long-range communications array." Messages from whom? She'd wondered, but hadn't asked. The past week had been a delicate dance of suspicion and pretense. She played the role of the trusting healer while watching for any opportunity to confirm her growing fears about Kel's true nature. The trading post bustled with activity despite its remote location. Merchants hawked exotic goods from across the galaxy, while prospectors restocked supplies. Before heading back into Verdania's untamed wilderness, the cacophony of voices and emotions hit Naya's empathic senses like a physical blow after weeks of isolation. Kel's hand found hers as they walked through the crowded marketplace, his fingers intertwining possessively. To any observer, they looked like lovers on a romantic outing. The thought made Naya's skin crawl. Though she maintained her carefully composed facade. "There's the communications center," Kale said, nodding toward a gleaming structure at the settlement's heart. "Why don't you browse the market while I check for messages? I won't be long." Naya agreed, though every instinct told her not to let him out of her sight. As he disappeared into the crowd, she made her way toward a stall selling medical supplies, hoping to find replacement components for her mysteriously damaged analysis equipment. Naya Viridian. The voice belonged to a woman in spacer's leathers. Her weather-beaten face split by a genuine smile. Naya recognized her as Vera Cassiopeia, a freelance trader who occasionally passed through Verdania's system. "Vera, it's good to see you." Naya found herself genuinely pleased by the familiar face. "What brings you to Meridian Falls?" "Cargo run to the Outer Rim." "Should have asked. I could have brought supplies to your clinic." Vera's expression grew concerned. "You look tired, Naya. Everything all right out there in the forest?" Before Naya could answer, Vera's gaze shifted to something behind her. The trader's face went pale, her hand instinctively moving toward the blaster at her hip. "Get away from him," Vera whispered urgently. "Right now." Naya turned to see Kale approaching through the crowd, his violet eyes scanning the marketplace with predatory intensity. When he spotted them, his expression shifted to one of practiced charm. "There you are," he said, slipping an arm around Naya's waist. "I was starting to worry." Vera's hand tightened on her weapon. "You son of a..." "Vera Cassiopeia," Kale interrupted smoothly. "Still running contraband through the Terminus sector." "I see. How's business?" The trader's face flushed with anger and something else, fear. "What are you doing here, Thorn? This isn't your usual hunting ground." "Hunting ground." The phrase sent ice through Naya's veins. Kel's arm tightened around her waist, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a warning. "I'm recovering. From injuries, actually. Thanks to my lovely companion here." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "Naya saved my life." Vera's eyes darted between them, understanding dawning in her expression. "Naya, you need to know that I'm a wanted man." Kel's voice carried a dangerous edge. "That there are rewards posted for my capture across 7 systems." I was planning to tell her myself. Naya felt the blood drain from her face. Vera took a step forward, her hand openly resting on her blaster now. "He's not just wanted for theft or smuggling," Vera said urgently. "Tell her what you really are." "Thorn," Kale sighed theatrically. "Such dramatic accusations. What exactly am I, in your professional opinion?" "A predator," Vera spat. "You target isolated women, healers mostly. Gain their trust." Then she stopped, horror crossing her features. "How many has it been now?" 15, 20. The marketplace seemed to fade around Naya as the implications hit her. Every kindness Kale had shown, every moment of apparent vulnerability, every touch that had made her heart race, all of it calculated manipulation. "You're lying," she whispered, though she knew Vera wasn't. Kale turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd found him, his mask slipped completely. The warmth in his violet eyes was replaced by something cold and predatory. "Am I?" he asked softly. "Think back, Naya. How convenient that you found me exactly where your empathic senses would lead you. How perfectly. My injuries were positioned to elicit maximum sympathy without actually threatening my life. How quickly I learned the layout of your clinic, your routines, your weaknesses." Each word was a dagger to her heart. "The pain I felt from you can be manufactured with the right training." His smile was cruel now. "Did you really think you were the first empath I've encountered? I've had years to perfect my technique." Vera's blaster was in her hand now, though she couldn't get a clear shot with Naya so close to Kale. "Naya, move away from him, now." But Kel's grip on her waist was like iron. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Vera. You see, Naya and I have become quite close, haven't we, darling?" As he spoke, Naya felt something invade her mind, a foreign presence that wrapped around her thoughts. Like poison ivy, images flooded her consciousness, moments of tenderness that felt real despite everything. Conversations where she'd shared her deepest fears and dreams. The growing conviction that she was falling in love with this beautiful, damaged man. No. She gasped, recognizing the mental manipulation for what it was. "You've been in my head. Making you feel what you wanted to feel," Kale corrected. "I simply provided the framework, the loneliness, the desperate need for connection. That was all you." The psychological violation was more intimate and horrifying than any physical assault could have been. Naya realized that nothing she'd experienced with Kale was real. Her emotions, her growing attraction, even her moments of doubt, all had been carefully orchestrated by a master manipulator. "You're sick," she breathed. "I'm efficient," Kale replied. "And you, my dear Naya, are exactly what I've been looking for, a powerful empath, isolated and trusting, with abilities that could prove quite useful in my line of work." Which is what, exactly? Despite her horror, Naya found herself genuinely curious about the creature she'd been harboring. Kel's smile was genuinely pleased, as if she'd asked about his favorite hobby. "I acquire things for clients who can't acquire them through conventional means. People, mostly. Empaths are particularly valuable. They make excellent interrogators." Among other uses, the casual way he discussed human trafficking made Naya's stomach turn. But beneath her revulsion, anger was building, the same clean rage she'd felt back at the clinic. "And if I refuse to cooperate, oh, darling," Kale laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "You won't refuse. You see, I've spent weeks studying you, learning exactly which emotional buttons to push. By now, I know you better than you know yourself." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Besides, I have insurance. 3 other women currently in my custody. All trusting healers who thought they were saving a wounded stranger, refuse to cooperate, and they die, slowly." Vera made a sound of disgust. "You bastard. How do you live with yourself?" Kale shrugged. "Quite comfortably, actually. The pay is excellent, and I genuinely enjoy my work." His grip on Naya tightened. "Now, I suggest we continue this conversation somewhere more private." "Vera, thank you for the dramatic revelation scene. It saved me the trouble of explaining things myself." But as they started to move through the crowd, Naya made a decision. She reached out with her empathic abilities, not to read Kale, but to project raw, undiluted terror flooded from her mind into every sensitive individual in the marketplace. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Empaths and psychics throughout the trading post began screaming in sympathetic terror. Crowd panic set in as people fled in all directions, not understanding the source of their sudden, overwhelming fear. In the confusion, Vera got her shot. The plasma bolt took Kale in the shoulder, spinning him around and breaking his grip on Naya. She rolled away as he hit the ground, her empathic projection cutting off as she focused on escape. "This way," Vera shouted, grabbing Naya's hand and pulling her toward the spaceport. But even wounded, Kale was terrifyingly fast. He caught up to them at the edge of the marketplace, his face a mask of cold fury. Blood seeped through his shirt, but he moved as if the injury was merely an inconvenience. "Clever," he said, his voice deadly calm, but ultimately pointless. "You can run, Naya, but I know you do well now. You won't abandon those other women to save yourself. It's not in your nature." He was right, and they both knew it. Naya stopped running, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Don't listen to him," Vera urged. "We can get help, bring in security forces." "Who'll arrive too late," Kale finished. "My associates have orders to execute the prisoners if I don't check in by sunset. And Naya knows I'm not bluffing." Standing there in the chaos of the panicked marketplace, surrounded by the emotional chaos she'd created, Naya realized that Kale had been right about one thing. He did know her better than she knew herself. He'd identified her fundamental weakness, her inability to let others suffer, when she had the power to help. But he'd made one crucial mistake in his assessment. He saw her compassion as weakness, her empathy as vulnerability. What he'd failed to. The compound was hidden deep in Verdania's ancient forest, where the crystalline trees grew so thick that even the planet's twin suns barely penetrated the canopy. Naya sat in the passenger seat of Kel's stolen transport, watching the luminescent markers flash by as they followed a route he knew by heart. The casual familiarity with which he navigated the hidden paths told her this wasn't his first operation on Verdania. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, breaking the tense silence that had stretched between them since leaving Meridian Falls. Cale glanced at her, his wounded shoulder apparently causing him no discomfort. The plasma burn from Vera's blaster should have incapacitated most people, but he moved as if it were nothing more than a minor scratch. "Planning what, specifically?" "Your recruitment. About 6 months. I heard about the brilliant young empath who'd isolated herself on Verdania through my network of contacts. It took considerable effort to arrange our first meeting. You staged the entire crash." Naya realized with growing horror. Not just the crash, the injuries, the emotional signature you detected, even the location where you found me. His smile was almost admiring. "I studied recordings of your previous rescues, analyzed your response patterns. You have a very specific type of suffering you can't resist." The clinical way he discussed manipulating her made Naya's skin crawl. "And the others, the women you mentioned?" "Ah, yes, you'll meet them soon enough." Kel's expression grew thoughtful. Each one thought she was special, that our connection was unique. It's fascinating how empaths, for all their ability to read others, remain so vulnerable to their own emotional needs. The transport slowed as they approached what looked like a solid wall of crystalline trees, but as they drew closer, Naya saw that the vegetation concealed a sophisticated entrance. Bioscanners confirmed their identities before the living barrier parted to reveal a compound that took her breath away. The structures were built into and around the ancient trees themselves, creating a seamless blend of technology and nature. Buildings spiraled up the massive trunks, while walkways connected different levels through the canopy. It was beautiful, organic, and utterly isolated, the perfect prison disguised as paradise. "Welcome to my home away from home," Cale said as the transport settled onto a landing platform. "I think you'll find it quite comfortable. I've always believed that valuable assets should be well maintained." Assets. The word made Naya's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral. She needed to see the full scope of his operation before making any moves. A figure emerged from the nearest building, a tall, athletic man with the kind of casual grace that spoke of military training. His dark hair was cropped short, and his cold gray eyes assessed Naya like she was a piece of equipment. "Thane," Cale called out as they exited the transport. "Meet our newest addition, Naya Viridian, the empath I've been telling you about." Thane nodded curtly. "The others are secured in the holding area. We had some trouble with the Centaurian woman. She tried to use her telepathy to contact someone off-world. Dealt with neural inhibitor implant. She won't be projecting anything anymore." The casual discussion of what amounted to mental mutilation made Naya sick. She forced herself to remain composed as Cale led her deeper into the compound. "Thane is my business partner," Cale explained conversationally. "He handles the more technical aspects of our operations while I focus on acquisition." They passed through several levels of the Tree City, each more sophisticated than the last. Naya saw laboratories, communication centers, and what looked like holding facilities. The scope of the operation was staggering. This wasn't some improvised criminal enterprise, but a well-funded, professional organization. "Impressive, isn't it?" Cale noted her expression. "We've been building this network for nearly a decade. Empaths, telepaths, healers. There's a huge demand for psychically gifted individuals in certain sectors. Corporate, espionage, information, extraction, entertainment." He shrugged. "The applications are limitless." They reached a reinforced door marked with biohazard warnings. Cale placed his palm on the scanner, and the barrier slid open to reveal a sterile white corridor lined with cells. "The holding area," he announced, "where your new colleagues are waiting." The first cell contained a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20. Her auburn hair hung limp around a face marked by despair and exhaustion. When she saw Cale, she pressed herself against the far wall of her cage. "Please," she whispered. "I told you, I can't do what you want. My gifts don't work that way." "Patience, Mira," Cale replied with false kindness. "Training takes time. You'll learn." The second cell held an older woman, perhaps 40, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. A neural inhibitor gleamed against her temple like a technological parasite. Commander Lydia Voss, Cale introduced, former military intelligence, specialized in telepathic interrogation. She's been with us for 3 months now. The third cell was empty, its door standing open. Ah, Cale said, noticing Naya's gaze, that was going to be your accommodation. But I think we can arrange something more comfortable, given our special relationship. He led her to what appeared to be a luxury apartment built into the heart of one of the great trees. The living walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and furniture grew organically from the floor and walls. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and utterly isolated. Your new home, Cale announced. I think you'll find it has everything you need. Naya walked to the window, if it could be called that. The transparent section of the living wall looked out over the forest canopy, but she could see the faint shimmer of an energy barrier. No escape that way. The barriers are quite effective, Cale confirmed, reading her expression. Energy fields that respond to biological signatures. Try to pass through them without authorization, and you'll find the experience unpleasant. He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Despite everything she knew about him, Naya felt her body respond to his touch, a response she now realized had been conditioned through weeks of careful manipulation. You don't have to stay in the cell like the others, he murmured against her ear. Cooperate, and you can have freedom within the compound. Refuse. His grip tightened slightly. Well, you've seen the alternatives. Naya closed her eyes, fighting the artificial attraction his presence triggered. What exactly do you want me to do? For now, rest. Acclimate to your new surroundings. His hands began a gentle massage of her shoulders. Tomorrow, we'll begin your training. I have clients who specifically requested an empathic healer for some delicate work. What kind of work? Kel's laugh was soft and chilling. The kind where someone needs to be kept alive during extended interrogation. Your healing abilities would ensure they remain conscious and responsive, no matter how creative the questioning becomes. The image he painted made Naya's stomach turn. She would be used to help torture people. Her gift perverted into an instrument of prolonged suffering. I won't do it, she said quietly. Bo, but you will. Cale turned her to face him, his violet eyes boring into hers. Because if you don't, Mira dies, slowly and painfully, while you watch. Then Commander Voss. Then whatever new acquisitions we make. His smile was predatory. I know you, Naya. You'll sacrifice yourself to save strangers, because that's who you are. It's what makes you so perfectly exploitable. The psychological chains he'd wrapped around her were more effective than any physical restraint. He'd identified her core nature and weaponized it against her. But as Cale pulled her closer, his arms encircling her in a mockery of romantic embrace, Naya made a crucial realization. He was right about her nature. She would sacrifice herself to save others, but he'd made a fundamental miscalculation about what that sacrifice might entail. There's dinner waiting in the kitchen, he said, finally releasing her. Real food, not the nutrient paste the others get. Another benefit of cooperation. He moved toward the door. I'll be back later tonight. I think it's time we deepened our relationship. The implications were clear and nauseating. As the door sealed behind him, Naya sank into one of the organic chairs and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She was trapped in a sophisticated facility with no chance of escape. Her empathic abilities, which had always been a source of strength, had been turned against her. The man she'd saved and whom she'd been conditioned to care for was a monster who planned to use her gift to inflict suffering on innocent people. But Cale had made one critical error in his assessment of her character. He saw her empathy as a weakness to be exploited, her healing nature as a limitation to be manipulated. What he failed to understand was that empathy, pushed beyond its breaking point, could become something far more dangerous. He thought he'd captured a healer. What he'd actually acquired was a weapon whose true potential he couldn't begin to imagine. As night fell over the forest compound, and the bioluminescent walls of her prison began to glow more brightly, Naya began to plan. She had perhaps hours before Cale returned. expecting to find a broken woman ready to submit to his will. Instead, he was going to discover that predators weren't the only ones capable of setting traps, and sometimes the prey had teeth,